December 17, 1938. The German aircraft carrier Schwabenland departed Hamburg Harbor on a mission that would spawn conspiracy theories lasting over 80 years, officially. The expedition was conducting scientific research and surveying Antarctic territories for future whaling operations unofficially. Something else was happening in the frozen south. The ship carried some of Nazi Germany's top polar experts, experienced pilots, sophisticated aerial photography equipment, and enough supplies. For months of Antarctic operations, what they discovered, what they mapped, and what they allegedly built in the ice would become one of World War II's most enduring mysteries. Welcome to the story of Neuschwabenland, New Swabia, and the legend of Base 211. Before we venture into the ice and separate fact from fiction, I need your help. If you're fascinated by the mysteries of World War II, the unexplained corners of history, and the line between conspiracy and reality, smash that like button right now. This video digs deep into primary sources, declassified documents, and actual evidence to explore one of the war's strangest stories. Subscribe and hit notifications because we're exploring more hidden history that mainstream sources ignore. Comment below. Do you think Nazi Germany built secret Antarctic bases, or is this pure Cold War mythology? Let's find out together. The story of Nazi Germany and Antarctica begins long before 1938. German interest in the frozen continent stretched back to the early 1900s. German scientists participated in international Antarctic expeditions. German whaling fleets harvested the Southern Ocean by the 1930s. Norway dominated Antarctic whaling through control of key territorial claims. Norwegian companies held exclusive whaling rights to vast Antarctic waters. This was a problem for Germany. Whale oil was essential to the German economy. It was used in food production, especially margarine. It was crucial for explosives manufacturing. Germany imported tens of thousands of tons of whale oil annually, mostly from Norwegian sources. Hitler's government wanted to break this dependency. If Germany could establish territorial claims in Antarctica, German whaling fleets could operate independently of Norwegian control. The Reich would have direct access to whale oil without relying on a foreign power. This was the official motivation for the 1938 expedition: economic independence, resource security, national prestige, standard imperialist thinking for the era. But there were other factors at play. Nazi ideology included mystical elements that some leaders took very seriously. The concept of a hollow earth, ancient civilizations, and hidden knowledge appealed to certain Nazi officials. Antarctica featured prominently in some of these theories. German occultist literature of the 1920s and 1930s contained references to Antarctica as a potential refuge of ancient Aryan civilizations. Some fringe theorists claimed the continent held entrances to subterranean worlds. How much these ideas influenced official policy is debatable. Most serious historians argue they had minimal impact. The expedition was primarily economic and strategic, but the mystical elements existed in the cultural background, and they would later feed the conspiracy theories. The expedition was led by Captain Alfred Richer, an experienced polar aviator and explorer. He had flown in the Arctic, conducted numerous aerial surveys, and understood the challenges of polar operations. His team included meteorologists, geographers, geologists, oceanographers, and photography specialists. Two experienced Lufthansa pilots, Richard Heinrich Schirmacher and Rudolf Meyer, would fly the reconnaissance missions. The ship, Schwabenland, was a modified aircraft carrier capable of launching and recovering seaplanes using catapult systems. This was cutting-edge technology for 1938. The vessel carried two Dornier-Wall flying boats, large seaplanes capable of long-range reconnaissance with sophisticated camera equipment. The plan was elegant sail to Antarctica. Launch aerial photography. Missions over unexplored territories. Map as much coastline and interior as possible. Drop marker flags establishing German claims. Then return to Germany with evidence of territorial discovery that could be used for international sovereignty claims, weather permitting. The expedition would also conduct oceanographic research and investigate potential sites for future shore stations. The Schwabenland departed Hamburg on December 17, 1938, and arrived in Antarctic waters in mid-January 1939. The location they chose to explore was the region between 20 degrees west and 10 degrees east longitude. South of the Atlantic Ocean, this area had been partially explored by earlier Norwegian expeditions, but remained largely unmapped. Most importantly, it was not yet subject to formal territorial claims under international law. The Germans called it Neuschwabenland, New Swabia, after the Swabia region in southwest Germany. Between January 19th and February 5th, 1939, the expedition conducted 15 major aerial photographic surveys. The Dornier Wall seaplanes flew systematic grid patterns across the territory, photographing approximately 350,000 square kilometers of Antarctic coastline and interior. This was a massive achievement. The photographic coverage was unprecedented for the time. The cameras captured mountain ranges, ice shelves, coastal features, and inland formations. The quality of the photography was remarkable, clear enough to identify significant geographical features. During these flights, the aircraft dropped special marker flags at regular intervals. The flags were aluminum poles with swastika pennants, designed to be dropped from aircraft and penetrate the ice upon landing. Each flag marked a point of German territorial claim. Exactly how many flags were dropped is unclear. German records suggest several dozen, possibly over 100. The purpose was to demonstrate physical occupation under international law. By planting markers across the territory, Germany could argue it had taken effective possession. The expedition also discovered and named numerous geographical features: the Mühlich-Hoffmann Mountains, the Walthat Massif, the Schirmacher Oasis. Dozens of peaks, glaciers, and ice formations received German names. Many of these names remain in use today on international Antarctic maps. The Schwabenland expedition returned to Hamburg on April 11, 1939. Having completed its primary objectives, Captain Richer reported complete success. Germany now had documentation of territorial discovery, photographic evidence of 350,000 square kilometers of Antarctic territory, and the basis for formal sovereignty claims. The expedition's findings were presented to Hermann Göring, who oversaw the operation as part of his responsibilities for the four-year plan economic program. Göring was pleased. Germany now had leverage in Antarctic affairs. Plans were immediately drawn up for a follow-up expedition in 1939-1940 that would establish permanent shore stations in Neues Squaw, Mamie Squablum. These stations would support year-round whaling operations, meteorological research, and formal occupation of the territory. Construction began on a purpose-built Antarctic research vessel. Equipment was assembled, personnel were recruited. Then on September 1, 1939, Germany invaded Poland. World War II began. The planned 1939-1940 expedition was canceled. The research vessel under construction was repurposed for military use. All Antarctic plans were shelved indefinitely. Germany had more immediate concerns than whaling rights in the frozen south. The Neuschwabenland expedition seemed destined to be a footnote in history, but the story didn't end there. During the war years, rumors began circulating about Nazi activities in Antarctica. Intelligence reports, often vague and unconfirmed, suggested German vessels were operating in southern waters. Submarines were supposedly using Antarctic refuges for resupply. Allied naval intelligence took these reports seriously enough to include Antarctic waters in anti-submarine patrol areas. After Germany's defeat in 1945, captured documents and interrogations of German naval personnel revealed references to Antarctic operations. Nothing definitive, a tease, nothing conclusive, but enough fragments to suggest something had been happening in the South. Then came the most explosive claims in the immediate post-war years. Stories emerged that Nazi Germany had established a secret base in Neuschwanstein land during the war. Not a scientific station, a military fortress. According to these accounts, the base was built using advanced tunneling technology to create a vast underground complex within the Antarctic ice. The facility supposedly housed laboratories, living quarters, storage depots, and even manufacturing capabilities. The most extreme versions claim the base was intended as a last refuge for Nazi leadership if Germany lost the war. Himmler, Bormann, and other top officials would escape to Antarctica and continue the Reich from this impregnable fortress. Some accounts went further, claiming advanced technology was being developed there. Flying discs, exotic propulsion systems, secret weapons that would allow a Nazi comeback. These stories spread through fringe publications, conspiracy literature, and sensationalist journalism in the late 1940s and 1950s. They were amplified by several factors. First, the post-war discovery of genuinely advanced German military technology. The V-2 rocket, jet aircraft, guided missiles, all demonstrated that Nazi scientists had been working on revolutionary weapons. If they had achieved those breakthroughs, what else might they have developed in secret? Second, the disappearance of numerous Nazi officials at war's end. Adolf Eichmann, Joseph Mengele, Klaus Barbie, and hundreds of others escaped justice and went into hiding. If they could disappear so completely, why not in Antarctica? Third, the secrecy surrounding post-war Antarctic expeditions by the United States and other nations. Operation Hajump, a massive U.S. Navy expedition to Antarctica in 1946-1947. Involved over 4,700 personnel and multiple warships. The official purpose was surveying and establishing American presence. But the scale of the operation seemed excessive for simple exploration. Conspiracy theorists asked, was the U.S. Navy really hunting for secret Nazi bases? These elements combined to create the legend of Bass 211, supposedly the code name for the Nazi Antarctic fortress. Over subsequent decades, the story grew more elaborate with each retelling. Books, documentaries, websites, and films explored various versions of the Base 211 narrative. Some treated it as fact, others examined it skeptically. Most fell somewhere between. The legend became a permanent fixture of alternative World War II history. But what actually happened? Did Nazi Germany build a secret Antarctic base during World War II? To answer that, we need to examine the evidence carefully, separating documented facts from speculation and fabrication. Investigating the Base 211 legend requires understanding what we actually know from primary sources versus what has been added. Through speculation and embellishment, the documented facts about Nazi Antarctic activities are surprisingly limited. The 1938-1939 Schwabenland expedition is well documented. German archives contain Captain Richer's official reports, flight logs, photographs from the aerial surveys, and correspondence about the expedition. These documents are available to researchers and have been extensively studied. The expedition did exactly what it claimed to do. It conducted aerial photography, mapped territory, dropped marker flags, Kwachaliza, and returned to Germany. There is no evidence in these documents of anything beyond standard exploration activities. The photographs taken during the expedition show Antarctic geography, mountains, ice shelves, coastal features. They show no structures, no installations, no evidence of construction or habitation. This is important. If secret bases were being planned, there should be some indication in the expedition records. There isn't. The planned follow-up, expedition for 1939-1940, is also documented. Records show that preparations were underway, a ship was under construction, and plans existed for establishing permanent stations. But these were to be standard research stations similar to those operated by other nations. The documentation describes buildings, fuel storage, radio equipment, all conventional facilities. Nothing in the planning documents suggests military fortifications or underground complexes. When war broke out, all of this was canceled. The records clearly show the Antarctic program was shut down as resources were redirected to the war effort. So much for the pre-war period. What about during the war itself? This is where evidence becomes much thinner. German naval records show U-boat operations throughout the Atlantic, Pacific, and Indian Oceans. Some submarines operated in southern waters off South America and Africa, but documentation of U-boat activities in Antarctic waters, specifically, is almost non-existent. There is one confirmed exception. In 1942, the German auxiliary cruiser Steyr operated in the South Atlantic and South Indian Ocean, attacking Allied shipping. The ship's logs mention operating at latitudes approaching Antarctic waters, but Steyr was destroyed in September 1942 without ever reaching Antarctica proper. Several German U-boats operated off the southern tip of South America during the war. U-boats were confirmed in the Strait of Magellan region, Argentine waters, and around the Falkland Islands. Could these submarines have ventured further south into Antarctic waters? Possibly. The range of Type 9 U-boats would have allowed it, but there's no documentation proving it happened. Captured German naval records from the war are extensive. The Allies seized vast archives of U-boat logs, command orders, operational reports, and communication intercepts. Researchers have spent decades studying these documents. If routine Antarctic operations had occurred, there should be evidence. There isn't. This doesn't prove Antarctic operations didn't happen. Records could have been destroyed, falsified, or kept in separate archives that were never captured, but the absence of evidence is significant. The post-war interrogations of German naval personnel are also revealing. Admiral Karl Dönitz, commander of the German U-boat fleet and briefly Hitler's successor as head of state, was extensively interrogated by Allied intelligence. Dönitz was asked specifically about Antarctic operations and rumors of secret southern bases. His responses were consistent. Germany had conducted the 1938-1939 expedition, planned follow-up missions that were canceled due to the war, and otherwise had no significant Antarctic activities during the war years. He denied any knowledge of secret bases, Kubo refuges, or military installations in Antarctica. Dönitz had no reason to lie after the war. He was already convicted of war crimes. Revealing Antarctic bases would not have increased his sentence. If secret bases existed and he knew about them, why continue denying it? Other high-ranking German naval officers gave similar accounts. Captain Richer himself, when interviewed after the war, described the 1938-1939 expedition in detail, but mentioned nothing about secret bases or wartime construction. The evidence from German sources consistently points to the same conclusion. The Antarctic program was a pre-war exploration effort that was canceled when the war began. But what about physical evidence in Antarctica itself? Several post-war expeditions have searched the Neuschwabenland region looking for signs of Nazi activity. Norwegian, British, American, Soviet, and later international teams have extensively explored and mapped the area the Germans surveyed in 1938 to 1939. Some of the aluminum marker flags dropped by the Dornier aircraft have been found. They prove the German expedition happened and marked territory as claimed, but no structures, installations, or bases have been discovered. Modern satellite imagery covers Antarctica comprehensively. Ground-penetrating radar has mapped subsurface features. Scientific stations throughout the continent have explored extensively. If a major installation existed, especially one large, enough to house Nazi leadership and advanced technology, it would have been detected. The Schirmacher Oasis, one of the ice-free areas in Neuschwabenland, has been particularly well studied. The Soviet Union established Novolosarevsky, stationed there in 1961. India later built Maitree Station nearby. These stations have operated continuously for decades. Scientists have explored the entire Oasis region extensively. No Nazi bases have been found. This doesn't completely rule out the possibility of a hidden installation. Antarctica is vast. Unexplored areas remain. Subsurface structures could theoretically exist, but the complete absence of any physical evidence after decades of searching is telling. The conspiracy theories rely heavily on supposed documentation that has been selectively quoted, misinterpreted, or in some cases fabricated outright. One frequently cited piece of evidence is a statement attributed to Admiral Quedetz in 1943, supposedly saying, "The German submarine fleet is proud of having built for the fur in another part of the world a Shangri-La, an impregnable fortress." This quote appears in numerous books and websites about Base 211. The problem: there's no primary source for it. Researchers have searched German naval archives, wartime records, and Dinitz's documented speeches and writings. The quote doesn't appear anywhere in verified sources. It seems to have originated in post-war sensationalist publications and been repeated so often it became accepted as fact. Similar problems plague other supposed evidence. Documents are quoted out of context. Statements are attributed to officials without verification. Maps are claimed to show secret bases, but actually show standard geographical features. One popular piece of evidence is a supposed map of Antarctica showing the continent's true geography beneath the ice, allegedly found in German archives. This map reportedly proves the Nazis had detailed knowledge of Antarctica's subsurface features, which conspiracy theorists claim could only have been obtained through ground-penetrating radar technology that didn't officially exist at the time. The real story is more mundane. The map in question is actually a composite created in the 1960s using multiple historical sources, including the German 1938 to 1939 expedition data. It was never a secret Nazi document. The subsurface features it shows are based on scientific measurements and seismic surveys conducted by multiple nations after World War II. Not from Nazi sources, but in conspiracy literature, the map's true. Origins are ignored in favor of a more exciting narrative. This pattern repeats throughout the Base 211 mythology. Real documents and real events are taken out of context, embellished, or combined with fabrications to create a seemingly plausible story. The result is a legend built on a foundation of misrepresentation. However, to fully understand why the legend persists, we need to examine the context of the early post-war years and the expeditions that fueled speculation. If you want to understand why the Base 211 legend refuses to die, you need to understand Operation High Jump. In August 1946, barely a year after World War II ended, the United States Navy launched the largest Antarctic expedition in history. Operation High Jump, officially designated the United States Navy Antarctic Developments Program, involved 4,700 military personnel, 13 ships, and multiple aircraft. The flotilla included the aircraft carrier USS Philippine Sea, the submarine USS Senate II, seaplane tenders, 2 destroyers, 2 cargo ships, and 2 tankers. The expedition was led by Rear Admiral Richard Cruzen under the overall command of Rear Admiral Richard Byrd, America's most famous polar explorer. The scale was unprecedented. No previous Antarctic expedition had involved a tenth of this manpower or equipment. The official objectives were straightforward: train personnel in polar operations, test equipment in Antarctic conditions, consolidate American territorial claims, and establish a permanent Antarctic base. The operation was scheduled for 6 months, but was cut short after only 2 months, departing Antarctica in late February. 1947. The official explanation for the early termination was weather conditions and the approaching Antarctic winter. These facts are all documented and not in dispute. What happened next turned Operation Hajump into conspiracy theory gold. Upon returning to the United States, K. Merrill Byrd gave interviews to the press. In one interview, he supposedly made a cryptic statement about threats from the polar regions. The exact quote is disputed, but conspiracy theorists claim Byrd said something about objects that could fly from pole to pole at incredible speeds. No verified recording or transcript of this statement exists, but the claim has been repeated thousands of times in conspiracy. Literature combined this supposed warning with the expedition's early return, and conspiracy theorists had their smoking gun. The theory developed quickly. Operation Hajump wasn't a training mission. It was a military assault on Nazi Base 211, according to this narrative. The U.S. Navy had intelligence about a secret Nazi installation in Neuschwabenland. A jump was sent to destroy it or force its surrender. But the Nazis had advanced weapons, possibly flying disc technology. They fought back, inflicting casualties on the American forces and forcing a retreat. Admiral Byrd's supposed statement about polar threats was a veiled warning about this Nazi technology. The U.S. government covered up the defeat to avoid public panic and international embarrassment. This version of events became foundational to the Base 211 legend. It seemed to explain everything: why such a massive expedition was needed, why it returned early, why Byrd made strange statements, why the whole affair was downplayed. The problem is that none of this is supported by evidence. The actual operation, Hajump after-action reports, which have been declassified and are available to researchers, tell a completely different story. The expedition accomplished most of its objectives. Personnel were trained in polar operations. Equipment was tested extensively. Thousands of aerial photographs were taken, significantly improving maps of Antarctic coastline. The Submarine Senate conducted the first underwater transit beneath Antarctic ice shelves. Weather data was collected. Research stations were evaluated. For future construction, one tragic accident occurred. 3 men died when an aircraft crashed into a mountain in bad weather. Several other minor accidents resulted in injuries, but there were no combat casualties. No reports of engagement with enemy forces. No references to mysterious weapons or flying discs. The expedition returned early, primarily because the Antarctic winter was approaching. Operating aircraft carriers and conducting flight operations in increasing ice and darkness was dangerous and inefficient. The decision to withdraw was made by naval commanders based on operational concerns, not because of any engagement with Nazi forces. As for Admiral Byrd's supposed statement about polar threats, researchers have found no contemporary newspaper accounts, radio transcripts, or official records containing such a statement. The claim seems to have originated years later in sensationalist publications. Byrd did give interviews upon his return, but the documented quotes discuss scientific findings, exploration accomplishments, and the need for continued American presence in Antarctica. Nothing about Nazi bases or advanced weapons. So why does the Operation Hajump conspiracy persist? Partly because the scale of the operation does seem excessive for simple training and exploration. 4,700 personnel is a lot for surveying coastline, but context matters. In 1946, the United States was transitioning from wartime to peacetime military operations. Hundreds of thousands of personnel needed to be kept occupied and trained. Ships needed shakedown cruises after wartime service. Antarctica provided an ideal training ground, remote, challenging, and useful for asserting American interests in the region. The size of high jump makes sense as a multitasking operation. Train personnel, test equipment, advance exploration, and demonstrate American capability all at once. Another factor feeding the conspiracy was genuine Cold War secrecy. While Operation High Jump itself was not particularly secret, various aspects of 1940s and 1950s Antarctic operations were classified. Nuclear weapons testing in the Pacific involved fallout that drifted toward Antarctica. Early warning radar installations had Antarctic components. Military communications used Antarctic sites. This real secrecy about some Antarctic activities allowed conspiracy theorists to claim that all Antarctic operations were suspicious. The United States conducted another major Antarctic operation in 1947 to 1948 called Operation Windmill, and then in 1955-1956. Operation Deep Freeze established permanent American bases. Each of these operations involved military personnel, classified components, and limited public information. Each fed speculation about hidden agendas. The Soviet Union also established Antarctic bases starting in the 1950s. Soviet activities were even more secretive than American operations. The Cold War Antarctic presence by both superpowers created an atmosphere of suspicion that benefited conspiracy theories. Meanwhile, actual Nazi war criminals were being discovered in unexpected places. Adolf Eichmann was found in Argentina in 1960. Joseph Mengele was confirmed to have lived in South America for decades. Hundreds of lesser-known Nazis had successfully fled to Argentina, Chile, Brazil, and other countries. This proved that elaborate escape networks existed. If Nazis could hide in South America, why not Antarctica? The Ratlands escape routes used by fleeing Nazis were real. The Vatican, the Red Cross, sympathetic South American governments, and various shadowy organizations helped war criminals escape Europe. Thousands of Nazis successfully evaded justice through these networks. The existence of these escape routes gave credibility to the idea that some Nazis might have fled even further south in the 1950s and 1960s. Several books and articles explored the possibility of Nazi Antarctic refuges. Most were speculative, but some were presented as investigative. Journalism. The Antarctica Enigma, published in 1963. Secret Nazi Polar Expeditions from 1966. And similar works combined factual information about the 1938-1939 expedition with speculation about wartime activities and post-war survival. These books rarely provided solid evidence, but they reached wide audiences and established the base 211 story in popular consciousness by the 1970s. The legend had evolved into a full mythology with multiple layers. The pre-war expedition discovered something significant: wartime construction. Created a massive base. Nazi leadership escaped there in 1945. Operation High Jump tried to destroy it, but failed. And the base might still exist today with surviving Nazis or their descendants. Some versions added UFO elements. The supposed Nazi flying discs became merged with the growing UFO phenomenon of the post-war decades. Claims emerged that Nazi scientists had developed anti-gravity technology, perhaps using information from ancient civilizations or even extraterrestrial sources. This technology was supposedly developed at Base 211. These more extreme versions blended Nazi mythology, UFO lore, and ancient alien theories into a comprehensive alternative history that had virtually no connection to documented reality. But they were entertaining, mysterious, and impossible to definitively disprove. After all, proving something doesn't exist is much harder than proving something does exist. The absence of evidence for Base 211 was explained away by claims of cover-ups, destroyed documents, and government secrecy. Any skepticism was dismissed as naivete or complicity in the cover-up. This made the legend effectively immune to debunking. Every counter-argument could be deflected as part of the conspiracy. Yet, despite decades of searching, no whistleblower has emerged with first-hand knowledge of Base 211. No deathbed confessions from elderly Nazis. No documents discovered and forgotten. Archives. The conspiracy requires thousands of people to have kept the secret perfectly for 80 years. Generals, admirals, politicians, scientists, journalists, construction workers, sailors, pilots, all would have been involved at some level. The probability of such perfect secrecy over such a long time across so many people is essentially zero. Secrets of this magnitude always leak, always. But the legend persists because it touches something in the human imagination, the idea of a hidden Nazi fortress at the end of the earth, of escaped war criminals developing superweapons in the ice, of a last bastion of the Third Reich waiting to re-emerge. His compelling drama, it transforms history from its messy, documented reality into something more like a thriller novel. And in our media-saturated culture, the thriller version often spreads further than the truth. To properly evaluate the Base 211 legend, we need to examine whether Nazi Germany actually had the capability to construct and maintain a secret Antarctic base during World War II. This requires looking at logistics, technology, resources, and strategic priorities. The fundamental problem is one of resources and priorities. Building and maintaining an Antarctic base requires enormous investment. Ships, aircraft, construction materials, fuel, food, equipment, and most critically, personnel. All of these resources would need to be diverted from the war effort during a time when Germany was desperately short of all of them. Consider what would be required for even a modest Antarctic installation. Ships would need to make multiple supply runs carrying hundreds of tons of construction materials, fuel, and provisions. Each voyage would take months and require ships that were desperately needed elsewhere. The German surface fleet was extremely limited during the war. Most major ships were sunk or bottled up in port by Allied naval superiority. Cargo vessels were primary targets for Allied submarines and aircraft. Risking valuable ships on multi-month voyages to Antarctica while losing the Atlantic convoy war makes no strategic sense. U-boats are sometimes suggested as the supply mechanism. Several Type 9 U-boats had the range to reach Antarctica, and conspiracy theories often claim U-boats secretly supplied Base 211, but U-boat cargo capacity was extremely limited. A Type 9 U-boat could carry about 200 tons of supplies. Building even a small base would require dozens of submarine supply runs. Each round trip to Antarctica would take at least 2 months, possibly 3. That's months when the submarine wasn't attacking Allied shipping, which was its actual purpose. The German U-boat fleet was never large enough to meet operational demands. Dönitz constantly complained about insufficient submarines. The idea that he would divert boats to Antarctic supply runs is implausible. Furthermore, U-boat operations were tracked extensively by Allied intelligence through code-breaking radio, direction finding, and traffic analysis. If dozens of U-boats had been making regular Antarctic voyages, Allied intelligence would have noticed the pattern. The decrypted German Enigma messages that the THLIs read throughout the war show no evidence of Antarctic operations. What about aircraft? The conspiracy theories often claim that advanced aircraft, possibly the RU-390 long-range bomber or the proposed America bomber, could have supplied Base 211. The RU-390 did exist. 2 prototypes were built. It had impressive range, theoretically, capable of reaching North America from Europe. But it never entered production. Only 2 examples were built, and both were destroyed before the war ended. There is no evidence either aircraft ever flew to Antarctica. The America bomber program produced various prototypes and designs, but none became operational before Germany's defeat. The vast majority of German aircraft were needed for operations in Europe, North Africa, and Russia. The idea that scarce long-range bombers would be diverted to Antarctic supply missions is logistically absurd. Then there's the question of construction. Building in Antarctica is extraordinarily difficult even. With modern technology, temperatures, wind, ice, isolation all create immense challenges. Contemporary Antarctic bases require massive investment and support. The United States Amundsen Scott South Pole Station costs over $150 million annually to maintain. Modern bases can be resupplied by air and sea relatively easily. They have satellite communications, advanced heating systems, modern construction materials. None of this was available in the 1940s. Building a secret base in Antarctica during World War II would have required technology and techniques far beyond what existed at the time. Conspiracy theories often claim the Nazis used advanced tunneling technology to create underground bases in the ice or rock. Nazi? Germany did develop some tunneling expertise. Underground factories were built in Germany to protect aircraft and V-2 rocket production from Allied bombing. These facilities used slave labor from concentration camps. Thousands of prisoners died constructing underground factories in German mountains. Even with this expertise and forced labor, the underground facilities in Germany were relatively modest and took years to construct. Building similar installations in Antarctica would have been exponentially more difficult. Ice is not a stable building material. It moves constantly under its own weight. Tunnels carved in ice would require continuous maintenance or collapse. Building in bedrock beneath the ice would require drilling through potentially thousands of feet of ice first, then excavating rock in sub-zero temperatures, all while maintaining supply lines across thousands of miles of ocean. The engineering challenges are staggering. Modern Antarctic construction projects, with all contemporary technology available, still face immense difficulties and require years of work. The notion that Nazi Germany could secretly build a major base with 1940s technology while simultaneously fighting a losing war on multiple fronts strains credulity. What about personnel? A functioning Antarctic base would require dozens to hundreds of personnel year-round. These people would need to be highly skilled: engineers, technicians, scientists, medical personnel, construction workers. Where would these people come from? How would they be recruited without creating security breaches? How would they be trained for Antarctic conditions? And most critically, what happened to them? If Base 211 existed and was abandoned at some point, where did the personnel go? Why? Has no one ever come forward? If the base continued operating after the war, how did it remain supplied? How did personnel rotate in and out? These questions have no satisfactory answers in conspiracy literature. Strategic priorities also argue against Antarctic bases. In 1942, 1943, and 1944, when conspiracy theories claim Base 211 was being constructed, Germany was fighting for survival. The Eastern Front was a meat grinder, consuming hundreds of thousands of men and mountains of equipment. The Africa Corps needed reinforcement. The Battle of the Atlantic demanded every available submarine. The bombing campaign against Germany required massive air defense resources. The Atlantic Wall needed construction. Every German ship, aircraft, engineer, ton of steel, gallon of fuel, and man-hour was desperately needed for immediate war efforts. The idea that significant resources would be diverted to building a refuge. In Antarctica, for a defeat that Hitler refused to contemplate is psychologically implausible. Hitler genuinely believed Germany would win. He never planned for defeat until the final weeks of the war. Secret escape bases contradict everything we know about his psychology. Furthermore, if Nazi leadership wanted a refuge from defeat, South America was far more practical. Argentina, Chile, Paraguay, and other countries had sympathetic elements. Travel was easier. Supply was simpler. Climate was survivable without extreme technology, and indeed, this is where Nazis actually fled. Hundreds of war criminals successfully hid in South America for decades. Not one confirmed Nazi war criminal was ever found in Antarctica. This practical reality undermines the Base 211 theory more than any archival evidence. If such a refuge existed, it would have been used. Yet all the Nazis who escaped justice went to accessible, habitable locations, not to Antarctica. The technological claims in Base 211. Theories also don't withstand scrutiny. Conspiracy literature often claims advanced Nazi technology was developed at the Antarctic base: flying discs, anti-gravity devices, laser weapons, free energy systems. These technologies didn't exist. Germany had no working prototypes of any of these systems. Documents from German weapons programs show no evidence of such developments. Germany did develop impressive weapons: jet aircraft, ballistic missiles, guided bombs. These are well documented, and their development is thoroughly understood. But exotic superweapons, no evidence exists outside of science fiction. The flying disc claims are particularly persistent. Several German aircraft designs had circular or semicircular planforms. Some were built as prototypes, but none were operational superweapons. Most were experimental concepts that never progressed beyond early testing. Conspiracy. Theorists have taken photographs of these experimental aircraft and claim they prove advanced. Technology was being developed, but the actual documents show these designs were conventional aircraft with unconventional shapes, not anti-gravity devices. The gap between real Nazi technology and conspiracy theories is vast. Real Nazi science was impressive in some areas, particularly rocketry and jet propulsion. But it was still 1940s science, limited by the understanding and materials of the era. The idea that they leaped ahead to technologies we still don't have 80 years later requires believing in scientific breakthroughs that left no evidence and benefited from no prior research foundation. It's implausible in the extreme, despite overwhelming evidence against the existence of Base 211. The legend continues to thrive in the 21st century. Understanding why requires examining the cultural and psychological factors that keep conspiracy theories alive. The Base 211 story appeals to several deep human tendencies. First, it provides a simple explanation for complex historical phenomena. The question of how Nazi war criminals escaped justice is actually quite complicated, involving intelligence operations, corrupt officials, institutional failures, and bureaucratic incompetence. The idea of a secret Antarctic base is simpler and more dramatic. Second, satisfies a desire for hidden order. The real history of world War II's end is chaotic. The Nazi leadership mostly died violently or committed suicide. The escape routes were improvised and opportunistic. There was no master plan. Base 211 provides that master plan. It suggests the Nazis weren't defeated, but merely retreated according to a secret strategy. This narrative is more satisfying emotionally than the messy reality. Third, the theory taps into fears about unchecked technological power. The atomic bomb, developed in secrecy and revealed with devastating effect, proved that secret weapons programs could succeed if the Manhattan Project could develop nuclear weapons in secret. maybe Nazi scientists developed other superweapons in equal secrecy. The fact that the Manhattan Project's existence actually proves how difficult it is to keep such programs truly secret is conveniently ignored. Fourth, Antarctica itself has mythological resonance. The frozen continent at the end of the Earth has fascinated human imagination for centuries. It was one of the last places explored. It remains hostile, remote, and mysterious. It's the perfect setting for hidden secrets. Our culture has used Antarctica as a setting for lost civilizations, alien bases, and secret installations in countless works of fiction. The Base 211 legend draws on this cultural association. The rise of the internet dramatically amplified the legend's reach in the pre-internet era. Conspiracy theories spread through books, magazines, and lectures. The audience was limited to people actively seeking such material. The internet removed these barriers. Anyone searching for Nazi Antarctica information encounters Base 211 theories within seconds. Websites, forums, YouTube videos, and social media posts present the theory with varying degrees of credibility. Some are obviously fringe. Others mimic serious journalism or documentary style. Presentation. For someone without expertise in evaluating historical sources, distinguishing between credible research and conspiracy theory can be difficult. Professional looking. Websites with citations and references can seem authoritative even when their information is completely wrong. The algorithm-driven nature of online platforms creates echo chambers where conspiracy theories are reinforced. Someone who watches one video about Base 211 will be recommended dozens of similar videos. Online communities form around shared beliefs. Skepticism is dismissed as closed-mindedness or cover-up. Complicity. These dynamics have given the Base 211 legend new life in the 21st century, despite zero new evidence emerging.